Okay. All right. I'm gonna step away a minute myself. Just finishing up.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without red and blue treatment.
Intro?
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have another excellent show for you today. We'll start off with a conversation on the Biden-Bernie Climate Task Force that has been joined by AOC. Oh, joy. Whether you realize it or not, this is a betrayal of the left, especially if your goal and objective is to get policy accomplished. Immediately after the monologue, we will dive into the new disastrous unemployment numbers released by the Labor Department this morning. A little later in the hour, Senator Richard Burr has been served. Now, if you remember, Burr sold millions of dollars of stock after an intelligence briefing on what was coming regarding the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the FBI has seized Burr's cell phone and has served him with a search warrant Wednesday night. Kelly Loeffler, the other person who was involved in this type of shady shenanigans, you better put a down payment on a lawyer. You are likely next. We'll also discuss the ruling out of Wisconsin Supreme Court squashing the extension of the governor's stay-at-home order by a tally of 4-3, finding it unconstitutional. Let us be very clear. The Republican Congress members and the Supreme Court of Wisconsin will have blood on their hands as the death toll in that state rises. In the second hour, we'll discuss the newly released information indicating that several members of the Obama White House, including Joe Biden, were involved in the unmasking of Flynn. We'll also get into the U.S. foreign policy with attacks in Afghanistan and the failed coup attempts in Venezuela. Last but not least, it's Thursday. That means the sexiest name show on the network trends with benefits. We often, on this channel, especially on my channel, dive into the rather darker aspects of our politics. But in this case, we're going to have a rather uplifting story that I'm actually looking forward to. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it's easy to feel isolated, especially with the social distancing procedures. This is doubly so for the elderly. And so they are uniquely susceptible to the virus in the standpoint of economic and from the standpoint of health. So this will be a segment that I think should not be missed, especially by our older audience. But let's start here. Early in the morning, our team tends to get together to discuss what we want to talk about to cover on the show. At some point, either in the morning or the previous night, I come up with what I want to talk about for the monologue, and usually this is the thing that bugs me or bothers me the most. Now, I didn't necessarily realize this, but as we were talking this morning, one of the things that kept pinging, the splinter in my paw, was basically AOC signing on to the Biden-Bernie mock task force on the issue of climate. Let's hear the clip of AOC resign to assist Joe Biden and John Kerry in this task force.
One, I was, as many people know, I was a very strong supporter of Senator Sanders. And Senator Sanders believes very much that this is something that, in a direction that he wants to take the campaign, and wants to make sure that we position progressive leaders as in very key positions to, at the very least, sway and push the Biden administration as much as possible to improve and better articulate progressive policy.
She sounds so resigned. Sanders wanted this. Sanders was backing this. And because of Sanders, I was a strong supporter of Sanders, and we're going to push Biden. None of that's going to happen. You're not pushing Biden anywhere. Bernie Sanders had already given over all of his support from the beginning. Before he even got into the race, he had already said, regardless of what happens in that race, he will be backing Joe Biden. I am sick of pretending that these people are backing issues of policy as opposed to just backing the Democratic Party. There is a vast difference in those things. 33 million people are without a job. I'm sorry, 33.5 million at the very least that file for unemployment. This is a chaos that is literally on the level and the scale of the Great Depression, complete with modern day breadlines. Our healthcare is tethered to our jobs, so the chaos also includes an estimated 30 million people without healthcare. Again, this is in the middle of a viral pandemic. Without healthcare, we can spend nearly $1 trillion polishing our nuclear arsenal while simultaneously not being able to attend to the needs and the healthcare of the people in this population. I am tired and I am done pretending. Hide under the desk in case of a nuclear bomb. I don't know if you remember this. This is what they used to tell people back in the older generations during the Cold War. In case of a nuclear blast, you just need to hide under your wooden desk to escape nuclear fiery fallout. This is the reason it's said that movements go to die in the Democratic Party. Basically, issues or items that these people might have pushed for before getting into the political space get subsumed and appropriated by the party. And party politics dominates any issues of getting those policies accomplished. In the same way that hiding under your desk is not going to protect you from nuclear fallout, backing a Biden task force on climate that has no propensity or power to get anything accomplished because it has zero leverage is also not going to do anything on the issue of climate. Are you not tired of playing this game? Let's be very clear. You either support a policy or you don't. This is a propaganda effort led by Sanders that has basically wrapped AOC in and hoping that her supporters on the left will back one Joe Biden, despite the fact that the organization that AOC associates herself with, Democratic Socialists of America, were very clear that they are not backing one Joe Biden. AOC has already said she'll be voting for Biden, and this mock task force that she's using or going involved in with John Kerry, I'm sorry, it's not going to get anything accomplished. The entire point of this is to sheepdog people into the Democratic Party. This is an issue of politics. This is not an issue of policy. This is entirely optics to make it look like Sanders supporters and the left got some level of concessions in this race when the reality of it is Sanders sold the farm for basically nothing. 30 million people without health care. And this is the nonsense that we're engaged in. Do you realize that nearly 70% of the population at this point is on board for Medicare for all? Put that in perspective. Nearly 70% of the population. AOC ran in the race where they ripped dinosaur Joe Crowley out of that seat after Crowley had been there for decades. That's her running massively under budget, meaning under the amount of money that Crowley had, and Crowley was the leadership in the Democratic Party. The people in her state, in her district, were so animated and ready for something new and something different, they chose AOC. They wanted her to push back against what the Democratic Party, or the norm of the Democratic Party, and man, was she a firebrand. I want a Green New Deal. I want a wealth tax. I want this. I want that. I want Medicare for all. And what happened? As she pushed for those policies, as she was unapologetic about those policies, the public perspective shifted. Everything from the wealth tax, everything from the Green New Deal, everything from Medicare for all. And I understand that was Sanders' brainchild. But from the standpoint of Congress, AOC was one of the strong, unapologetic people who were pushing this policy. And now she has been cowed into getting those people that were backing her to back a person and a party that is in no way representative of the policies that she got in office backing. We need a change. This is not something that we should be joining into from the standpoint of the left. This is something that needs to be resisted and pushed back upon. Nancy Pelosi, in her big plan, her FDR plan, is basically pushing for, instead of Medicare for all or Medicare for everyone with coronavirus, she's basically giving subsidies for people with health insurance, basically paying off the insurance companies to keep people insured. This is the best that they can do. This is what she's calling FDR. And this, yes, is what the progressives in Congress are backing. I'm making a very basic point that if you really want anything accomplished and anything changed, the policies of the Democratic Party should be resisted, not supported. And in a situation where the party pretty much is diametrically opposed to what you want from the standpoint of the left, especially in the standpoint of policy, and that should be dramatically clear going back in 2020. I hate to make this point again, but during the Democratic primary, it was very clear that each and every one of the Democrats were perfectly willing to lose to Trump if it meant getting Sanders or stopping Sanders. And yet the lefties, who can never, for whatever reason, pick up on this motif and pick up on the level and the desire in order to stop those particular policies from coming into force, continues to back a party that in no way is representative of those policies. This is a problem. This is a betrayal. This is not something that AOC or Sanders should be involved in. And nevertheless, here we are. Bob, once again, we have lefties who you could make an argument were part and parcel to a movement that are now sheepdogging people into a party that will basically kill that movement. This is sad and should be, again, resisted, not supported.
Yeah, I mean, AOC is not the hero you wanted her to be. I think for a lot of people, they saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the future left-wing brand of the Democratic Party, and it's just not going to happen. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think a lot of her, she's one of the best Congress people, or at least somebody that agrees with my ideologies. But I think ultimately, if we had an Overton window that was properly centered on what it meant to be centered, she would be on the center left. I don't think we give enough credit to how far the political spectrum here in America has shifted to the right. And so when we do have the AOCs of the world, she seems so far left because the system's so far right that in that system, yeah, she is the far left. I think we shouldn't just disavow her. I think we should also keep in mind that she is an important figure, but we should also keep in mind that there are half of the Democrats or half of the people that we want need to be to her left, and then the other half to the right. I think she's more of a centrist a centrist of a left, if that makes sense, Jamal. And I think we just need to be more realistic there because everybody wants her to be, she's the far left. I think Ilhan Omar and her speaking out on foreign policy issues and war issues, she's much farther to the left. Not I don't know much farther is the right word, Jamal, but she seems to the left of AOC. And so again, in these situations where AOC is a Democrat, she is trying to play the inside-outside game. She is still trying to organize the Democratic Progressive Caucus. She is playing the system and the game. She's somebody that went into Congress. And at this point, many people would say if you're spending time trying to get to Congress where nothing is done, where there's somewhat 13% approval rating of Congress, you're also not being really realistic about how to change things. So I appreciate her fighting. I appreciate her trying to push back on the Nancy Pelosi's of the world and offer something else. I think it's important to have a generational shift, to have somebody in their late 20s with this platform. So again, I think she's an important figure, but if we're hanging her hat on this like generational transitional major shift or change or something that Joe Biden's talking about transitioning to, I don't know if she's the she's the figurehead. Excuse me.
You can't cough, Bob. This is radio. You gotta suck that up for the radio,
right
Bob.
There, yeah, I tried to fight through it, but I don't know. The AOC gods are coming down on me. I've said too much bad about her, Jamal.
Well, you didn't say anything bad about her. And just so we're clear, I like AOC. Like, this is not me going after somebody who I think is betrayal. I use the term betrayal, and betrayal might be too strong. But I try to make the point that in no way is backing a party that is not in the interests of what you want, meaning you've eliminated all accountability from this process. And because you've eliminated all accountability, any notion of holding this party account. For example, when AOC said by herself, stood up for the lone vote saying, I am not going to be on board for this last package if it's not necessarily going to deal with the material needs of my constituency. Well, why did she at that point take that line in the sand as opposed to just going along with the other Democrats? Because it went too far. It was her setting a standard of accountability. Even if she was by herself, it was important for her to set that standard of saying, yeah, this is a no-go. Same thing that DSA did, same thing that I'm doing, same thing that I'm pushing a bunch of lefties to do. It's just in this case, she is working in a party. And in working in that party, there's all sorts of peer pressure that tells her you got to get Biden elected, even if you're against those policies. I think that's where it boils down. But I'm not dismissing her, so I don't want to.
Yeah, let's come back and talk more about this later, because I think there are a lot of things to talk about with those task force and what it looks like moving forward with whatever Bernie Sanders thinks he'll be able to get out of Joe Biden. Let's take our first break of the hour, Jamara, before we come to talk more about the latest job numbers presented by the U.S. government. And here on Political Misfits, we're going to dive into what those real unemployment numbers actually are. Yep. We'll also talk about the Wisconsin Supreme Court overturning a stay-at-home order, and we continue to cover the fallout of America's broken food supply chain. If that's not enough, Misfits, don't worry. We have a second hour for you after that. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
You checked out.
We couldn't put it better ourselves. Tune in to Political Misfits on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Miss the Press, our weekly takedown of Sunday's toothless news talk shows.
Hi, this is Max Kaiser for Double Down, new show on Sputnik with Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert. Everybody's doubling down. Central bankers are doubling down. Gambleaholics are doubling down. Everyone's doubling down. Why don't you double down? Right here at Sputnik with a new show called Double Down with Max and Stacey. Bye, y'all.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Guys, if you are digging this content, be sure to smash that like button and share this video. Also, your engagement on the show is amply appreciated and makes the show what it is. So definitely, we appreciate your texts, tweets, and your calls. 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So, our grim ritual of the employment numbers were released from the Labor Department this morning. An additional 3 million Americans are without a paycheck, forcing them to file for unemployment benefits. This takes the number to 36.5 million people, human beings just like you and me, that has had to file for benefits over the past 2 months because of the COVID-19 virus. Let's also note that the reporting indicates the systems of our government used to distribute and disperse funding are so underfunded themselves and are so overwhelmed that up to 70% weren't able to receive the benefits in a timely fashion. And this is dependent upon the state that you're in on whether or not the systems in order to disperse unemployment benefits are up to snuff or not. To discuss the numbers and what those numbers mean in real terms, we're joined by Trudy Goldberg, Chair of the National Jobs for the Coalition and Professor Emeritus of Social Policy at the Adelphi University. Trudy, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
What does it show? Well, of course, what we're getting is on a weekly basis the new claims for unemployment insurance, and of course they're up almost 3 million, somewhat more than expected. The numbers are going down somewhat from the huge surge of over 6 million, 6.7 million late in March. I guess the really important thing is that essentially the current stimulus in support of working people is modest, considering the expanded unemployment benefits, but those are going to expire at the end of July. And of course, many people are not getting their benefits. Just because they claim doesn't mean that they are. In fact, a much more efficient way of dealing with it would be with job retention schemes that are being implemented in other places where people are essentially kept on the payroll.
Speaking of the job retention schemes, what is the actual unemployment number? Meaning right now they're trying to estimate, or they're arguing or estimating that the employment number is like 14.7 to 16%. Why is that number in the rears? Meaning, why is that number wrong? And if that number is wrong, what is the actual number?
That it's wrong. One is useful reason that the official unemployment rate is always only a portion of all of the people who are really jobless. Because in order to be counted as unemployed, you have to, listen to this narrow definition, worked less than 1 hour a week in paid employment and be actively looking for a job during the time that the data were collected. So that leaves off, say, let's take the month of April, the 23.1 million official. Then you've got 10.9 million who are part-time but would like full-time work. They're at least half unemployed, aren't they? And then there are another 9.9, almost million people who are want a job but aren't actively looking. Well, would you be actively looking now? Probably not. Probably you might not feel it's safe to go to work. But in any case, so that brings the number up to, the percentage up to something like 26%, and instead of 14%, and almost 44 million people, 23. So that's the one reason. There's a traditional undercount on our website every month. That's the National Jobs for All Network, njfac.org. We give the real count. That is, we give the number of people who are counted officially, the smaller number, plus the other two numbers, which generally will the number. But there's another reason why there's an undercount right now, because the data were collected in mid-April. And as you know, unemployment kept going up. Now, usually there isn't that big a surge between the data collection and the time that they're reported early in the next month. But that would be the case now. So that we think that probably in April, I'm sorry, that the figures that will be released in June, usually the first Friday, are going to be much higher, perhaps in the 30% level, range.
Yeah, those revised numbers, we'll wait and see what those are. I think the Trump administration was happy to see 14.7% when obviously it's much higher. Those revised numbers that come in a little bit later will be the truth. I also wanted just to ask you a little bit about the psychology behind long-term unemployment. I think oftentimes we look at these numbers and we simply say, well, we just need to get people back to work. But people have been out of work for years now, and the unemployment crisis here in the United States dates well beyond the last 2 months of COVID-19. But you have people that are completely stopped looking for work, and the government's rigged their numbers in a way that no longer counts those people. So not only are we not actually addressing the needs of how to get people back to work, we're also eliminating and not even thinking about people that have been out of the workforce for several years.
Well, that's true. In a sense, we hope that the crisis is really unmasking all of the underlying inequities. We are a country that was ill-equipped to deal with a pandemic because of the underlying unemployment, the affordable housing crisis, the lack of health care for so many. And then, of course, as people lose their jobs, they're losing health care, which is another reason why one could question tying health care coverage to employment. Yes, in a sense, we hope that the crisis is going to give us an opportunity to deal with these underlying inequities that are certainly masked. I mean, the head of the Federal Reserve was talking recently about how much higher unemployment is and how particularly it's hit people earning less than $40,000 a year. In the middle of the term, FDR said, Franklin Roosevelt said that fortunately a catastrophe seems to have been necessary to focus people's attention more on ideals in government and its proper relationship to its citizen. Well, it's particularly unfortunate if it doesn't. With the Great Recession, essentially we got some movement in healthcare, but basically the inequities were not disturbed. And so one hopes that maybe this time around it will become clearer that we need to rethink who we are and what our obligations are to our citizens.
I love that quote by FDR. I absolutely love that quote by FDR. Because I agree, our political system has become so detached from what the public wants. I mean, even in the context of healthcare, 70% of the public is on board for Medicare for all. And Nancy Pelosi, the best thing she can come up with is basically subsidies for insurance companies. One of the stories that broke this morning, thanks, Bob, basically 15 minutes ago, Senator Richard Burr steps down, the Senate Intel chair, during the coronavirus stock sale probe. Now, this broke about 15 minutes ago. What rule or what law did Burr break in selling his stock after an intelligence briefing? I mean, of course, logically, that's utterly horrendous. But from the standpoint of the legal system itself, what was the rule or the law that Burr broke in doing this that allows the FBI to basically surveil or seize and issue a search warrant for him?
I'm sorry, I'm really not following that story. So perhaps you are in a better position to discuss it.
Oh, no worries. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This was just one of the news that broke. I do have a question in regards to opening up the economy. So in regards to Trump throwing open the doors of the economy, what would be a rational way for the economy to be reopened without a large loss of life? And is there a way for the economy to be reopened without a large loss of life?
To do sufficient testing to know how risky it is or it isn't. I think simply hasn't been done. And as far as I can see, there's every reason that the United States has the capacity to mount as much testing as South Korea. That is as much in relation to the population. The president lies all the time by saying, "Oh, we're testing more," but not in relation to the size of our population. I think they don't want to test fully. That would reveal the true extent, how widespread the virus is, and it might hamper them for this early opening that could, cost so many lives and really set us back. So,
huge numbers there in Spain speak to your point there, Trudy, as they continue to do the test to see who have the antibodies. I think it was like 2.3 million Spaniards had the virus at one point or another, and that's going to be clear in the United States when they actually do widespread testing along the way. You're going to see how many people have really been impacted by this. Trudy, I did want to ask you, I know you hadn't necessarily been following the Senator Richard Burr story, but he got caught up along with other senators who who had basically gotten intelligence reports from China saying that the virus was going to be quite bad. And Burr, along with the senator there from Georgia, who basically sold off their stocks in certain markets to hedge their bets before the virus really started to impact the broader economy. And so now Burr stepping down from the Intelligence Committee. But for me, it really shows how these politicians are in bed with billionaires, millionaires, the bourgeois, and the owner class, that these are people that don't care about the unemployed. They don't care about the workers. They don't care about families across the country. They don't care about seniors. These are people that have large homes, multiple homes. They are set. They have their pensions from Congress. They have their health care from Congress. But yet these are the people that are making life decisions for millions of Americans, and they basically are hiding in cloakrooms, making secret deals to make sure that they're wealthy. So Trudy, I'm always kind of curious, and we've been asking this question quite a bit. How do you organize the unemployed, and how do you organize the workers of this country to rebel and push back against these elected officials who do not have their best interest in mind?
Just one little aside, these people are not unemployed either. And it's a form of insider trading, I guess you might say. But in any case, I think that it's very important that we think in terms of a panic-induced recession is a little bit different from an economically induced recession. With an economically induced recession, you have people who don't have jobs are able to go to work if there are jobs. In the case of the pandemically induced recession, you have a problem of a lot of people who, of course, would like to work, but it's not safe to work. So I think once it's safer to work, I think the best way to stimulate the economy, and the one that we've been talking about, is with a job guarantee, and a job guarantee that is actually implemented through direct government job creation that can be targeted to where the need is greatest, that can create the kinds of jobs that we need in terms of services, in terms of attacking the climate crisis, all of those things that would really enhance the housing shortage and so on. And at the same time, instead of extending unemployment insurance for a long time, which is really what we did during the Great Recession, we had extended unemployment insurance. But instead of creating jobs that would both help workers and enhance the resources of the nation in the way that the New Deal did.
Trudy, I agree. I'm sorry. Please finish. I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
No. I didn't want to interrupt. Go ahead, finish this question. Your thought. Because the New Deal politics and the whole idea of the job creation thing, I absolutely agree with. I guess the only thing I would intrude on is it the issue is the virus. I mean, the issue is, like you said, tracing and those type of things in order to determine how many people are ill and how many people are sick. Wouldn't, at the very least in the short term, a universal basic income be more ideal in order to keep people at home so those people aren't actually working? I agree with the jobs guarantee on several levels. But at this very specific moment where we have, over 1.4 million people infected with the illness, where you have the virus expanding in the various areas of Heartland, where you have nearly, 84 million people, if not more, that have been killed at this point, wouldn't a UBI be more advantageous at this point? Or am I wrong? Is a job guarantee, even now, a better alternative?
I wouldn't call it a UBI. I would call it some form of income support until people are ready to work. I think that work in the long run is much more important, and there are enormous needs, and there will be more after this endemic. But I was careful to say when it is safe to go back to work. In the meantime, we could have a job retention scheme. It would essentially be what many other countries are experimenting with. That is that instead of the holdups that we're seeing unemployment insurance, because obviously the system is not equipped to deal with this enormous surge, would be to work through employers who would keep employees on their payroll. It is safe to go to work, or safe for them to work elsewhere if some of these companies fail. So no, I would prefer, of course, income support, but not necessarily a universal income, because that's never going to be large enough to really support people.
Trudy, Trudy, I just wanted to ask there, as you do talk about this, like what we do into the future over the next 6 months to a year. A lot of businesses are saying that they already know they're not going to come back regardless of when a stay-at-home order is lifted. What does it mean for the consolidation of work? Are there going to be less people working in the economy writ large? And then that kind of gets to this idea of what jobs are we going to create? Is the government going to invest in a job creation scheme when so much of our politics is around the privatization and sending these jobs to corporations with government money? So where are the jobs going to be? And as Jamal is asking there, is it simply a universal basic income? If millions of Americans have nowhere to work, what will they do?
Well, I'm saying that if we take the job creation scheme, in the meantime, not when people are able to work, I certainly agree, but I wouldn't call it a universal basic income grant. I would call it a temporary income support. And I would prefer the job retention approach. But we have enormous unmet needs in this country. And why not put people to work doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I don't think you're going to get any argument out of me. I guess it's maybe just the way in which the system is oriented, that it's not geared around helping people and basically getting people the needs, getting them the jobs, the work, the money, the resources they need to meet their own needs. And I guess here in Washington, D.C., Trudy, we've talked a lot about over the last some months where all of the people here that have been laid off from their jobs have been basically told, just add your name to the unemployment rolls. We'll get you the $600 a week check. And the government hasn't been instead trying to find ways to employ those people. And so you have all these people sitting at home, while then at the same time, the government is hiring corporations to deliver meals, to do contact tracing, to do medical and health support. And then they're asking other people to volunteer. It just seems like we don't have a government system because of numerous factors that would allow for the government to reinvest and to create a New Deal-esque for the year of 2020. So I guess I'm asking you a question beyond maybe that has answers for, and maybe looking forward, how do we create the movement that's going to pressure the system to adapt and to create this federal government jobs program?
Well, you see, we have a three-point program. It's relief, recovery, and reform. And of course, relief will require some form of income support, which could be the job retention approach. Extending unemployment insurance in the short run wasn't a bad idea, but that's going to be over at the end of July. I'm very much for government income support, but ultimately, I would like government money to come, and it is safe to work, form of employment, and employment to meet basic needs, to tackle climate change, to deal with the housing crisis, to deal with the need for child and elder care, public art, even. All of the things that were done during the New Deal, not enough and not universally. Ours is a modified New Deal scheme. So, and then I'm suggesting that a job guarantee is a form of recovery when it is safe to work, and a form of reform. It is the first. I think the U.S. don't we have something called a work ethic that we chronically make it impossible for people to adhere to? But in a sense, that doesn't mean we can't reduce the work week. It's been stuck at 40 hours a week for how many years? We could certainly have more paid vacations. We could certainly do things that spread out work. But I don't think we're ready for a universal basic income, except for those people who would not be expected to work. I am not talking against government income support, but I'm talking about it more in the short range. And in the long range, at least as long as we need much to be done. Look at our infrastructure. D+ from the Corps of Engineers. I mean, there's plenty of work to be done. Obviously, it's work that regular government employment and the private sector will not address.
Trudy, I'm curious. We're about to close out this segment, but I always, not just assume, I mean, anything that is, especially if it's not necessarily something that is in our interest, be it on a human level or societal level, there are incentives that allow that particular process to stay in place. And there are even incentives that prevent the process from changing. Why do you think that our society and the people of the society haven't necessarily gotten to the point of realizing that, look, we need either work, meaning a guaranteed employment thing, meaning what are the things that prevent something like that from not just coming into fruition, but even coming into the range of debate where we can even have that conversation about an unemployment or a federal jobs guarantee?
Boy, well, I think that there's always a denial of the extent of need. There's a tendency to blame the people who experience it. They're lazy or don't want to work. I think there's that. I think there is just this kind of we have to also deal with the racism that's involved, the sexism that's involved. I think it goes to some very basic issues in society, but I do think that a crisis is also an opportunity. Now, you mentioned organizing the unemployed. That is an area that I have explored. And of course, you need resources for that. And where is it going to come from? I think some of the job actions that we're seeing, some of the militant unions that are interestingly just of many women and are led by women are possibilities. During the Depression, the first organization of the unemployed and the development of mass movements, of course, is what really led to modest reform during the New Deal. But it was led by the Communist Party and later by socialists. So those were the major organizers early in the Great Depression. And then, of course, there was an interesting organization of soldiers, of veterans who wanted their bonus to be paid early because they were jobless and they marched to Washington. So we do need to build movements. And I guess we do need to have more of the kind of clarification that your kind of program is providing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Trudy. I really appreciate that. We do try to be a home for people to come and learn more about what's really taking place, and it's been very illuminating speaking with you over the last 20 minutes. That was Trudy Goldberg, the chair of National Jobs for All Coalition and professor emerita of social policy at Delphi University. Trudy, where can people go and find more of your work?
I want to suggest that at njfac.org is our website. We changed our name from coalition to network, but the website is njfac.org. And we've also been part of a movement for a job guarantee pledge. And we would encourage people to take a look at that website and sign on, because we're getting increasing numbers of signers, and that's called jobguaranteenow.org. Job
Very
guarantee.
great.
Our work is and the unemployment statistics that we analyze, and many other pieces related to this. I have an article on there that compares the basic income guarantee and the and a job guarantee. Which would do the better job, it's called.
Very good. We're all there to educate ourselves. With that, we are out of time with Trudy Goldberg. Trudy, thank you again for joining us. We turn now to a quick minute break. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in DC. We're back after this.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik. Shooting from the left.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people.
So where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out,
We actually let them expand on their views.
what's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. Jamarl, we're blowing through here the first hour of our programming. We have a lot of news to get to. We're here with you all until 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Jamarl, I wanted to start here in Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Supreme Court, which got quite a bit of play here a few weeks ago when they forced through the election to take place in that state. One of the big takeaways was that a Democrat or a left-leaning Supreme Court judge got on the court, but the court still favors conservative. And in a 4-3 ruling yesterday on Wednesday, the court rejected the extension of the state's stay-at-home order, siding with Republican legislators in a high-profile challenge of emergency authority of a statewide official during the coronavirus pandemic. Governor Tony Evers, a Democrat, had extended the prohibition on most travel and operations of non-essential business until May 26. But get this, Jamarl, a 4-3 ruling, the court said that Wisconsin's top health official had not followed the proper process in setting the strict limits for residents. So they weren't saying that you couldn't stay at home. It was the process in which they went about doing it. So although the opinion centered on the technical method by which the limits had been set, several conservative judges conveyed their dismay at the restrictions themselves. Justice Daniel Kelly wrote in a concurring opinion, quote, "This comprehensive claim to control virtually every aspect of a person's life is something we normally associate with a prison, not a free society governed by the rule of law." The ruling, Governor Evers' office said, appears to immediately end statewide provisions that have required many Wisconsin residents to stay home. Within hours of the ruling, Jamarl, some taverns were making plans for reopening.
Of course.
There was a study. I don't know if you saw this. They basically just had one person with paint, invisible paint on their hands, and then they had them go to a restaurant, and then they had everybody eating, getting food, hanging out. And within an hour, they turn on a black light at half of the restaurant had the invisible paint on them. People just don't comprehend how easy it is for this virus to spread. And it's like the seasonal flu where people just think oh, if you get the flu, you stay at home and maybe one coworker gets it, or it's this kind of thing that's hard to get and not many people get it. I don't think people really quite get COVID-19 is rapidly spreading. And in South Korea, we also saw one person at one nightclub infect over 100 people. So again, how are you going to taverns and bars?
Yeah, a super spreader, I think is what they call them. I agree with you, Bob, entirely. I mean, there are mixed feelings with this because I understand that not everyone is dealing with this in the same way. I mean, Michelle, you, myself, we've been fortunate to be able to, and the engineers, to be able to work for Sputnik where we basically can keep our jobs and do this stuff remotely. But there are a lot of people who can't. And we're talking about these 30 million people who lost their jobs, and not to mention the people who aren't getting work, meaning, yeah, they technically have their jobs, but they're not necessarily getting either pay or their pay has been dramatically cut. And so I have mixed feelings about it. But by the same token, the reality and the real thing in this is the virus and the spread of that particular virus and cutting that down before dealing with this kind of economic concerns. We need to make very clear that the issue with this is the government's ineffectiveness and inability to ensure that people are made whole, not necessarily the fact that people can't work. There's a difference in those things, and that needs to be understood.
Well, at the top of the hour, Jamarl, we're going to talk about the devastating impact that COVID-19 has on media. So let's not count our blessings too quick, though, but let's be thankful and blessed while we're still being able to bring live programming to you. Jamarl, I'm curious, and I'm curious for our listeners out there, 202-521-1320. Here in the Justice Daniel Kelly, as I read there, talked about how this was more of an ideological decision to keep people at home that he was frustrated with. He wasn't saying we have to restart the economy to save the country. And so it seems like part of the pushback against the stay-at-home orders is both ideological, and then it's also about the economy. I'm curious where you kind of see people pushing for things to reopen. Is it simply, you don't control us, I do what I want, this is America, home of the free, the individual, whatever stupid stuff we say that kind of justifies this go-it-alone ideology? Or is it more about the economy and that the ruling class who does control our politics in this country are just terrified that if they don't reopen things soon, that they're not going to be able to recover from this?
It's not one or the other, it's both. I mean, from the public standpoint, purely through ideology, you've heard me make this argument that basically there are real things and unreal things. We tend to focus on unreal things. And basically that focus on unreal things for the last God knows how long intervenes and intrudes upon people's consciousness in regards to what they think is normal. Pandemics happen. Real things happen. If there was a meteor strike or an asteroid that was going to hit this planet, and then the public says, yeah, but I don't want to spend money on it, how expensive is it going to be to deal with the meteor strike? That's utter lunacy. But that's kind of the way I see with this. It's like you have a real thing that's intervening into our typical life. And there's some people who accommodate it and just deal with it and say, look, I don't want to get sick. This is something that just happens. We just have to deal with it. And you have another group based entirely on ideology. And let's be honest, some of them actually need income and don't necessarily want to own up to the fact that they are in dire straits. Some of these people basically say, open it back up, I don't care. And, the 1% who are not going to be working at those jobs is perfectly okay with using the ideology of these people to agitate and push for these businesses to go open. It's both. I don't think it's one or the other, Bob.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And it's interesting to see how Donald Trump here will push back on both the ideological arguments as the economy. He gave an interview on Fox Business to Maria Bartiromo and had said in the interview, he said Democrats would rather see our country fail and create death than allow him to win another term. He went on to say, quote, so you think that they would rather see, Bartiromo asked, so you think they would rather see a recession, a terrible economy, joblessness, then you have another term. And Trump said they would rather see our country fail. They would rather see our country fail. And you know what that means, because of part of failure is death. They would rather see that than get me reelected. I'm driving them crazy. I don't know what it is. And so he's basically trying to say the Democrats ideologically and economically don't care about the American people. They only care to get him out of office. Do you see that playing well, Jamal? Because, and let me go back to Wisconsin here just to add another wrinkle to his quote. Some 69% of people polled in Wisconsin had said that they supported the state's move to close schools and businesses and restrict public gatherings. So there's I think the majority of people are behind the science and the stay-at-home orders and whatnot, but Trump is playing to his base. Do you think that's going to be a strong enough argument to play to the minority who doesn't want to stay at home to get him reelected?
So there are a few points. I actually agree with Trump on this, that basically the Democratic Party is perfectly okay with people losing their lives if it means they get elected, especially if they can blame Trump for it. Now, by the same token, the Democrats don't have to do anything. Donald Trump is doing this all on his own, and he is the one who's throwing open the economy that is flying in the face of the overwhelming majority of public opinion that says, keep it shut. So while he is right in the sense that Democrats are perfectly willing to do this, I mean, look at what they did. They basically passed every plan that Trump went with. They were in lockstep basically with the Republican Party. They effectively allowed Trump enough rope to hang himself on trying to open up this economy. And so I don't necessarily think they're wrong. Now they come out with a showpiece after losing all leverage and after basically giving Trump and the Republicans everything that they want. I have a hard time believing that Trump is wrong in making that point about the politics of this, where Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party can justify basically saying, yeah, we're not going to put up that much resistance. We're going to let Trump basically walk into this. By the same token, there is this other aspect of life where the public basically says, I think what it boils down to is the overwhelming majority of the public, even though they may be somewhat affected by this, they are looking at it as, look, I can work from home. I don't want to die. Where you have another section of the public that says, I can't work from home and my life is at risk. I think all of this stuff is just kind of taking place all at once. And there's this kind of mess of politics. But I think beyond anything else, above anybody else, Trump is going to be the one that's going to be adversely affected by this the most, because he has this quagmire of, I need to reopen the economy. I was living on the economy. By the same token, the moment that they double the death toll, and if you have 200,000 people that die, Trump is going to lose this election, and it's not going to matter what the Democrats do. That's my point.
202-521-1320. I agree on some points you make. I disagree on others. I don't think
Bring it.
The Democrats are sitting around doing calculus of like, how bad can we hurt Donald Trump? I think they're probably saying this is fine. This is going to hurt Donald Trump. We'll take it if he was going to run on the economy. This certainly isn't good. But I think it hurts a lot of incumbents across the country. If you're basically trying to file for unemployment benefits or you're trying to get support from your local municipality and they're saying no, you're going to basically blame them. And that's going to be Democrats, Republicans, and the handful of independents that hold any office in this country. And so I think incumbents are really going to see a hard time saying that they did enough if they're going along with just letting the economy tank, because people do want to see what they're doing. And instead, and we've seen this before, and maybe this is the problem with the Democratic Party, is that this is true, but I think it's clearly going to hurt them. They need to be offering something else instead. And so if that's their calculus, Jamal, and I guess I don't want to get in the side of the head of the Democrats because they don't think like I think and they don't share the same values. But for me, if they're simply saying, let the guy plummet and we'll win, that's a stupid strategy. And I don't think they're going to win.
But that's the point of the FDR plan.
Something else instead. And here's the scary thing on top of it. At some point, politics aside, it just doesn't matter, Jamal. It doesn't matter what Democrats and Republicans are doing when millions of people are losing their lives and we're all in the same boat of not having any of our needs met. It comes in a really stark way that we're told more information from Dr. Rick Bright, who was until last month the head of the HHS Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. He spoke to Congress today and he said, quote, if we fail to develop a national coordinated response based in science, I fear the pandemic will get far worse and be prolonged, causing unprecedented illness and fatalities. Without clear planning and implementation of the steps that I and other experts have outlined, 2020 will be darkest winter in modern history. What does politics matter at that point, Jamal, when we're living in the darkest winter in modern history?
Politics always matter. I mean, I would argue part of the reason we're living in the darkest period of modern history is because politics have become so detached from what the public wants. You know, I'm curious, from your standpoint, Bob, if this wasn't a Republican president, say for the moment that the politics was reversed, you had a Democratic president, Democratic Senate, and a Republican House. Do you believe that the Democratic Party would be doing anything drastically different in regards to ensuring that the public is taken care of in this process? Or do you think that they would also, maybe in a slightly different way, be trying to get people back to work as soon as possible, every bit as much, fervence as Trump is?
Yeah, I mean, if you dropped Democrats into power in the midst of the pandemic, no, I don't think it would be that much different because the House can come out and basically push forward any type of legislation and bills they want. And we saw Nancy Pelosi do it, and she didn't offer anything that was jaw-dropping or shocking or visionary or the shot to the moon. If they were in power before the pandemic happened, yeah, I do believe that we still would have had some of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention would have had more funding. We've seen cuts by the Trump administration to the CDC. We've seen him cut certain languages off the website. I mean, the Trump administration has gone to great lengths to gut the EPA, gut the CDC, and basic environmental and health protections. Even the task force that he had to set up was basically because he disbanded the task force that had already been in office to look into global pandemics. And so at some point, I do think we need to be very conscious that the Trump administration did quite a bit in their in office in the last 3 years to really roll back funding and programs to the sciences across the board that have led us to this moment. But then the response, I think, is different. I think the Democratic leadership on the Hill has shown that they don't have many different options than what Trump has done. And they see basically corporate bailouts, just like Obama bailed out Wall Street, as the path to saving an economy. And that's the economic advisors around them. Save the big banks, save the wealthy, make sure that it trickles down to whatever that means, and then continue to privatize public money. I think that's what the Democrats would offer. Right now, the New Deal was predicated on government spending and public spending. As Trudy was just saying, we need to create a government jobs for all guaranteed. That's not the Democratic Party of 2020 is not going to do that.
No, they're not. I mean, and for one very basic reason. In the same way that these guys are trying to get people back to work for the interests of the 1%, they are paid and bought every bit as much as the Republican Party. This is one party that basically has two wings that try to pretend as if these two wings are basically two separate parties. They are not. Let's be very clear. If the Democratic Party was in charge and they were trying to get these people back to work, there may be additional testing, fair enough. But I think they will be as fervent as trying to get people back. Maybe not cutting the CDC and those type of things, but I do agree with you that basically the policies are going to be very similar in regards to trying to get these people back to work. Because again, their interest is what is in the interest of the 1%. What is in the interest of the people who are basically funding us and giving us all of this cash? And I think it boils down to We need bucks. And because we need these bucks, we need these people back to work, which means that giving people UBIs is probably something that's not necessarily going to be on the table. Or for that matter, giving people resources that would allow them to be able to hunker down for several months, I don't think will be on the table even under a Democratic administration, for the very specific reason that these companies want these people back to work. That's my thought.
Jamar, let me slide in one just last story of a few minutes left before the end of the hour, and we'll be back with another hour, so don't go anywhere. But a new piece out today in the New York Times talks about the psychological impacts of COVID-19 on pig and chicken farmers who have had to kill thousands of their animals as the U.S. food supply chain has been thrown into chaos. The New York Times article here, Jamar, reads, quote, one Minnesota hog farmer sealed the cracks in his barn and piped carbon dioxide through the ventilation system. Another farmer has considered gassing his animals after loading them into a truck, and a third shot his pigs in the head with the gun. It took him all day. Greg Boom of Marshall, Minnesota, who was interviewed for the story, said, quote, there are farmers who can't finish their sentences when they talk about what they have to do. Boomer is currently trying to find ways to avoid killing a backlog of more than 1,000 pigs, and went on to say this will drive people out of farming. There will be suicides in rural America. The article goes on to read, quote, the number of pigs being slaughtered but not used for food is staggering. In Iowa, the nation's largest pork-producing state, agriculture officials expect the backlog to reach 600,000 hogs over the next 6 weeks. In Minnesota, an estimated 90,000 pigs have been killed on farms since the meat plant began closing last month. Steve Meyer, pork industry analyst, said, Jamar, the economic part is damning, but the emotional and psychological and spiritual impact of this will have much larger consequences.
This is the point, and this is why I say it's all politics. Joe Biden is bringing in Larry Summers, people of policy, right? And so it's going to be pretty clear what Larry Summers focuses on. You have a situation where government action is required for something like this, meaning in various states you have these food banks where people are dire needs of not having food. Simultaneously, you have farmers who spend the day shooting their pigs in the face because they don't have enough people to buy food. How weird is that as a system? I mean, this was what we were seeing during the Great Depression, right? You had these people out of homes with all of these homes right there. You had all of these people out of jobs with all of these factories, with all of the equipment. Nothing changed. All of the hardware in order to build resources for the society was still there. And all of these people who typically work those jobs were standing on the outside of the factories. We're basically seeing that right now. How weird and backwards of a system that is.
Yeah, and capitalism is the home for innovation, creativity, and all the greatest thoughts man has ever come up with, shooting pigs in the head and psychological damage to farmers. Great job, capitalism. Jamar, we are out of time for our first hour, but we have a jam-packed second hour coming your way. In the second hour, we're joined by our good friend Ted Rall to talk about the ongoing Michael Flynn drama, the erosion of trust in Western media, and our weekly Trends with Benefits segment, that and much more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in DC. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, sort of kind of with Jamar Thomas. We are staying at home, but we're bringing you live broadcast daily from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. Hopefully you're listening to us on a number of different places, 105.5 FM, the Progressive Soapbox YouTube channel, or on Sputnik News. If you're not listening to us live, you can also check us out daily on podcast platforms all over the internet. Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Sputnik News also has those daily shows, as I mentioned, in the evenings. But wherever you are, make sure to review, give us a thumbs up, and share with your friends. Lots to cover here over the next hour, including the future of media post-COVID-19 and what U.S. international policy will look like under a potential Joseph Biden presidency. But don't want to scare you guys too much. We won't go too in depth because I know Joe Biden in the Oval Office scares me too, and what his foreign policy means. So let's start elsewhere. We first start with the story that might carry every day of the news cycle this week. That is the efforts of the Department of Justice to drop all charges against former National Security Director General Michael Flynn. Hard to say former when Flynn was in his position for all of 24 days, but it is on his CV now and forever. Here to talk about Flynn and much more is the award-winning editorial cartoonist and columnist Ted Rall. Ted, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, Ted, Flynn is not yet out of the woods. After it looked like he may be heading for greener pastures, it looks like Flynn could now be charged with perjury. U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan in Washington said he had asked John Gleeson, a former federal judge in New York, to recommend whether Flynn should face new criminal contempt charge for perjury. Gleeson has also been asked to make the case for why the DOJ's motion to dismiss the Flynn case should be rejected. Gleeson, a former Bill Clinton appointee, co-wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post earlier this week regarding the case, saying, quote, "Government motions to dismiss at this stage are virtually unheard of. There has been nothing regular about the department's effort to dismiss the Flynn case. The record reeks of improper political influence." However, many are not buying this argument and this tactic by the court's constitutional law professor at George Washington University, Jonathan Turley, wrote on Twitter, quote, "Judge Sullivan has now appointed a retired judge to look into whether the court should issue an order to show cause why Mr. Flynn should not be held in criminal contempt for perjury. Thus, the court is not only considering denying an uncontested motion for dismissal, considering a new charge based on Flynn's effort to withdraw his plea. Consider the implications for many cases where defendants seek to withdraw pleas due to prosecutorial abuse. It would create a threat of judicial charge even when prosecutors agree with defendants." Oh, and Ted, if that was not enough, this is the headline of the Wall Street Journal last night. Quote, "More than a dozen Obama officials requested unmasking that identified Michael Flynn in intelligence reports. One of those folks was U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, who had made 7 requests, yet testified under oath before the House Intelligence Committee that she had, quote, no recollection of ever making such a request even once." Ted, what have you made of this week of Michael Flynn news?
We only have half an hour, right? It's hard. I promise. We can. I'm a cartoonist. That's my job. It's hard to know that with the Michael Flynn case, the hypocrisy of the system is amazing. I mean, if you ever have to wonder how power works and how here it is. They refuse to follow even their own rules. That's kind of one of the things that you learn as a young leftist, is that even if you're following their rules, they won't follow them themselves. So, so Flynn is in this situation where he's been, the DOJ decided not to pursue this. So the judges it's hilarious that he could possibly be charged with perjury. And the reason he would be charged with perjury is because he's now saying, well, I was forced to plead guilty, but I didn't really mean it. I wasn't really guilty because I took a plea. Well, everybody who's ever been pressured by prosecutors knows exactly how that goes. I mean, I read somewhere that over 98% of federal cases in the United States never go to trial at all. And the reason, it's not because 98% of the defendants are guilty of the crimes or of any crime that they're charged with. It's because the power of the state is so immense. So you did this or that, and they hit you up with 27 charges that would put you in prison for the rest of your life. And your lawyer says, well, you cop a plea, and you'll be back to your wife and kids in 2 years. And so you plead guilty. Doesn't mean you were guilty. And so it's hilarious because they basically forced you to lie in the first place. And now maybe you get charged with perjury for the lie that they forced you into. It's kind of awesome.
Let me ask you from the other angle there on the second half of the story there about the unmasking of Flynn's name. It does seem like Barack Obama knew about the investigation into the Trump's alleged ties to the Russian, I don't even say the Russians, whatever the Russians means in the Democrats' mind there. But I'm curious, this is a bizarre question to ask because I think Biden will hurt himself aplenty, but will Barack Obama end up hurting Biden? I want to say this because, look, the Russiagate stuff has not played out in the favor of the Democrats. Barack Obama seems like he'll be tied to it now and forever. His team was looking into Flynn. Other people in his team were part of the dossier, or the DNC obviously was part of the Steele dossier from the beginning. Is Trump not basically teed up to say, look, I came here to drain the swamp. We're seeing how huge the swamp is and more of these swamp monsters need to get out of there. Bring me back in and I'll finish the job.
Well, look, I think it's certainly a scandal, but I don't think it's a scandal with any serious political implications for the general election. I think to the extent that this could have made a difference, it would have been when Bernie Sanders and the other contenders against Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries were still in the game. They could have benefited them. The way that Biden attached himself to Obama's legacy, and now the fact that he's essentially, it shows the use of the corruption, FISA warrants, and the way that Obama and Biden attached themselves to the national security state exposed by Snowden. And it's, again, there's an issue of law breaking that is systemic that people don't really follow. For example, the NSA is prohibited by its original charter from intercepting any kind of U.S. intelligence, signals intelligence. So in other words, if there's a phone call between me in the United States and someone in another country and the NSA, quote unquote, accidentally intercepts it, they're supposed to black out my name. That's what happened here with Flynn. His name was redacted. And that's where it should stay. But seemingly, over 1,000 times last year, apparently, the government agencies and officials ask for these names to be unmasked, supposedly so they understand the context, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And that's unfortunately, it's issue. The privacy rights issue has been completely lost, and we really never got to start that conversation. But getting back to the issue that is actually occurring here, I don't think that the Obama leg is going to really sort of move the needle either way, no matter how tarnished Obama does get by this. I mean, Obama's baked in with Team Democrat. He's baked out with Team Republican. The voters are not going to be making the decisions. Swing voters are not going to be making a decision this fall based on this particular issue. They're going to be looking at the coronavirus and the economy, or the lack of an economy.
Ted, I'm curious. In this case, I have to be honest, the Flynn case concerned me greatly. There was a conversation basically earlier on when Bob was doing his intro where they made the point of saying that this is beyond the pale in regards to what prosecutors do, that is prosecutorial misconduct for them to somehow get rid of this particular case. I would make the opposite argument. Obama comes in and gives a statement saying, hey, this Flynn thing is a travesty of justice and this goes against the law and all of this other stuff. But the reality of it is, they knew Flynn was innocent. Flynn hadn't did anything wrong. And the FBI decided to have an investigation of Flynn entirely to either arrest him or get him fired. They had already had the conversation with Kislyak, meaning they unmasked that process. So they already knew. So the only reason they would bring Flynn in is to capture Flynn for something, meaning entrapment. I guess the catch becomes, is this typical policy of the FBI? I mean, for them to make this argument that, hey, it's beyond the pale for you to undo this, well, is it typical policy for the FBI to basically already know the information, bring people in when they didn't do any crime, and find or catch that person in a lie when they already have all of the information associated with the case?
Wish there was a way to answer that question, right? I mean, we don't know what their typical policy is, but I think what is clearly typical is that these people do whatever they want as long as it fits. We see that with Tara Reid. There's one set of standards for one set of people and another set of standards for everyone else. And so it's the lack of integrity that is so disturbing, right? Aside from the fact that they're, as usual, trying to play it both ways, it is exactly like you said. It's gross abuse of governmental power. If Richard Nixon is somewhere watching, he's got to be thinking, like, holy cow, they almost impeached me for like nothing compared to stuff that's fine routinely. It doesn't seem fair.
Ted, I also wanted to ask you here where this leaves the U.S. media that went bananas over this whole Russiagate story, and we're watching it unravel. Obviously, none of them are going to admit to it, but you have MSNBC, for example, who basically said, well, look, it wasn't even us that were programming and producing our shows. It was the Russians. The Russians had us in such chaos and confusion that we didn't know what we were doing anymore. What is left of the U.S. media and their credibility? And I ask that in a very serious way as we go through this pandemic right now, where we do need the media to be a check on a Trump administration that's rolling out lie after lie and not keeping our best interest in hand. One of those ways to check back against the government is the media, but the media has basically shown we're here to make money. We're not here to inform you.
Well, the problem is that the vast majority of Americans are really not exposed to alternative media sources. So they don't know that the Russiagate narrative has unraveled. If you're paying close attention, you can read between the lines, but most people don't. Most people are busy. They're busy working, or they're busy worrying about keeping their families safe. So I don't, when I talk to a lot of very well-educated people who still say, Russia interfered in the election. I'm like, but that story just never held water from the beginning, and there's never been any evidence presented, and it all fell apart. And they're like, nah, that's not true. I watched Rachel Maddow. She didn't say that. And so the media can always control the narrative in such a tightly scripted environment with fewer and fewer original sources, greater conglomeration. There's no sort of I.F. Stones out there, forcing mainstream to acknowledge a narrative that doesn't go along with their official line of propaganda. So I think right now, the mainstream media, they still enjoy some credibility, far more than they should. But of course, obviously, they're doing everything they can to destroy it. But they're still coasting along on, Woodward and Bernstein back yonder.
I'm curious, Ted. You do cartoons, and it's funny. I was looking at some of your cartoons before we did the show. What do you lampoon? Like, what is the mechanism? I would imagine you, part and parcel to what you do in regards to the cartoons, are to make the point of, look, this is the reality of events versus this is what they're saying the reality of events, and using the cartoon to show the disparity between what's real versus what they're saying. Am I wrong on this? Is that the metrics, or is that the way in which you try to get across your particular point of view through your cartoons?
That's a good question. I love this question because it's something that I struggle with all the time. People assume that when politics and politicians are extreme and over the top, as they are now, that cartooning is easier. And conversely, so for example, when Obama was initially elected, not that I was a major supporter of him, I voted against him in the primaries, I voted for John Edwards. But when he was elected, people, a lot of my peers who were liberal Democrats said, well, now our job's going to be really difficult because, here's this guy that I approve of, and he's now the president. It's exactly the opposite in my experience, because cartooning is about, and satire are about, taking something that is a little bit absurd and then exaggerating it to the nth degree and showcasing how, if this were to be 10 times further worse, if this were crazier, look at where this could go. But if you're in extreme times, how do you lampoon some of Trump's tweets or for that matter, some of the, Democrats' prognostic, statements as well? You really can't. All you can do is sort of point to them and say, look at that, that's really bad, or that's really silly, or that's really stupid, which many of my peers do, but I don't think it makes for the best cartooning. I think it ends up sort of being redundant or propagandistic and not very relevant. So I try to come in from the side and showcase issues and points of view and aspects to a story that otherwise might be getting ignored, that are just sort of people aren't thinking about. So that's really kind of like what I'm after. So for example, I just today where I was talking about how there's we're calling all the frontline workers like at the supermarket and so on heroes. And quite frankly, they probably don't need to be called heroes. What they really need is a real salary and the right to unionize. Right. So, that's probably something no one else is saying right now. So just there's value in that. But I do miss more quote unquote normal times because it makes for better cartooning.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can check out all of Ted Rall's work there at rall.com. Ted, I think of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and thinking what Saturday Night Live going to write the sketch. And it's like, what do you even possibly write as a sketch here when this is beyond comical what is actually taking place here? And that's why I think so much of the media has been so incredibly lazy, especially the late night talk shows that would just constantly attack Donald Trump. It's like, it's not that hard to do. There's nothing creative here. There's nothing insightful here. Nobody's learning through your comedy. You're just punching down just to make it seem like you're some type of intellectual superior. Yeah. And that's a huge issue for me. So I appreciate you, Ted, thinking a little deeper on the work that you do. Ted, I want to stay on the media, but I want to talk a little bit at a different angle about the economics of media here during the COVID-19 pandemic. Layoffs, furloughs, pay cuts are abound. Let me just read a few headlines here to paint just how dramatic the picture is across the countries. Salaries were cut at the Phoenix New York Times, Denver's Westworld, Dallas Observer, Houston Press, and Miami New Times. The Pulse in Chattanooga, Tennessee suspended publication. Orlando Weekly laid off 13 people. Gannett had furloughs and other cost-cutting measures, including 25% pay reduction for executives. Tribune Publishing announced permanent cuts between 2 and 10%, and executives will take cut. Tribune newsrooms, including the Tribune, Chicago Tribune, New York Daily News, the Baltimore Sun, and the Virginian Pilot, it also had furloughs. Los Angeles Times had furloughs and pay cuts. Washington Times instituted 10% pay cuts, and most freelance contracts were suspended. On the radio, iHeartMedia had furloughs. iHeart had stations in 153 markets, and almost in all of those markets, they're making pay cuts. Radio 1 had layoffs and furloughs. And online, BuzzFeed cut employee pay, cut AM to DM its morning news show. 8 people lost their jobs and furloughs of some staff. Washingtonian Magazine laid off fellows and had 10% pay cuts. You get the point here, Ted. The entire media industry is facing the brunt of the economic collapse. And ultimately, for me, this always means higher consolidation, less media outlets for people to turn to. I'm curious what you think it means for the long-term future of media in America.
Yeah, and let's not forget the Cleveland Plain Dealer is pretty much out of business for all practical purposes as well. I know it's a dire thing. I mean, what's the irony is, of course, that here we are in literally the biggest story of our lifetimes, the biggest news story, and we're losing all of our major media outlets. And it's not all about money, I should say. I mean, a lot of these companies have been suffering from declining circulation, and of course now collapse of the advertising model, which many of us warned against back in the 1990s when there was the whole information wants to be free, and newspapers decided to put all of their content for free online. And now, of course, with the exception of newspapers that can have successful paywalls like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, that's the bankruptcy of that model is being proven. But like I said, it's not all about money. Like the guy who owns the LA Times is worth $9 billion. He's a biotech billionaire. And why does he have to furlough anyone? I mean, he can afford to keep them on for the rest of his life, no problem, and still have money left over for pizza. So I think there's sort of a recognition that the media, print, old-fashioned legacy print media, it was on the ropes, and this is the end of it, because there's literally just no possible future in which ad revenue will ever come back to anything approaching what it even was before the pandemic. And it was already king fast because online sources were able to direct advertising more accurately and more specifically to readers. You could buy ads, we just want to target 22 to 24-year-olds in greater Tulsa, people between $40,000 and $45,000 a year. You could do that on Facebook. You just can't do that in a newspaper. And I keep talking about newspapers because print newspapers still generate at least 90% of all original reporting that you see online, listen to on the radio, and watch on television. And so those outlets are going to go under, and there's just going to be even more of a golden age of political and other forms of corporate corruption going forward. I think something new will emerge, and has to, because people desperately need and want information. Business needs reliable information in order to make projections for the future. But right now, we're just seeing the end of the old order.
Speaking about that, Ted, going into this notion of print media going under. And it makes sense. It's kind of like the same effect that took place in regards to music, where you had all of these like Napster, Amazon Music, all of these things that allow people to get music basically for free, in which case people didn't necessarily need to buy albums or CDs, in which case you had places like Tower Records and some of these other peaches that used to be in Richmond basically go under. Well, the media is being stuck with the same issue. You have all of this content that is online for people to see. But I think some people miss that a lot of this content is driven, as you make the point, paper media. And the news media, from the standpoint of papers, are the ones that have reporters abroad. I mean, the New York Times, Washington Post, the recent story that the Washington Post broke about the Afghan files, I don't see an online publication breaking a story like that. Same thing with New York Times and the stories that were taking place about either Syria, meaning the billions of dollars that the Obama administration was spending in Syria to undermine the government, or even when you had the death squads back in South America. New York Times, amazing reporting on this stuff. Those things are going under. So is there anything that's going to replace this kind of old order where we're going to get this level for all of our complaints about mainstream media? But is there anything in internet media that is going to somehow replace these investigative stories, either from the standpoint of foreign policy or even the standpoint of domestic policy? What is going to replace our print media and their investigators?
Things are going to be lost forever. And I think it's important to understand that. I mean, people who love the magic of the marketplace always like to say, hey, don't worry, there's disruption, but then there's creative destruction, and then something new inevitably replaces what was lost. And in field after field after field, that's just not true. And this is no exception. There's not going to be, I think investigative journalism and, for example, long-form journalism and war correspondency, conflict reporting, like from Afghanistan, it's just not going to happen at all. It's a lot of stuff is going to happen outside of the awareness of the American public because no one's going to cover it. I mean, I've done war correspondency from Afghanistan, and it's expensive. It's cheaper than it used to be, but it's still way too expensive. You can't get anyone to pay for it. And so, these stories are just going to happen, and we're not going to know. And what's truly terrifying about that is that there could be grave blowback and 9/11 style repercussions. And we're going to wonder, well, where did this come from? At least historically, we kind of should have known, even if we chose not to pay attention. Now, even if you are paying attention, you're not going to have any way to have foreshadowed or anticipated what might be coming down the pike. I think we're losing local reporting. We're losing, any kind of investigations of what's going on in, for example, the prison system or in City Hall. We're losing any kind. There's never going to be a story where you put a reporter undercover, for example, inside a police department to expose corruption. Or in a prison or anything like that. It's just not going to happen. There's no money in it. There's no interest. There's no one to hire anyone like that. In fact, the fact that we used to even do that kind of reporting is something that's lost to editors who are under 50 or 60 years old because it never happened at any point in their lifetimes. We're talking about stuff that happened, back when I was a little kid. I'm 56.
Yeah. Sorry, as you mentioned Afghanistan there, just thinking about the tragic news the last few days there of attacks being carried out across the country. Well, we're going to have to get into that later. We want to stick on this topic here. I know DJ has a call. DJ, are you here with us?
Oh, yes, I'm here with you.
DJ, always a pleasure to hear from you. What's on your mind today?
I was just making a comment about the caller. He mentioned an owner of the LA Times having $9 billion and money not being a motivation. I kind of agree with that. I mean, logically, I can see where he would conclude that, but there's a lot of power in controlling flow of information.
That's right.
And I mean, literally, media outlets are considered, we have 3 branches of government, but if you look it up, the media is considered like an unofficial 4th branch. Because if you can explain to people, you can draft narratives, you can make people move. You know, I hate the term like power to the people because people already have power, and our government, like our government understands that if you mobilize people, you have a means to do it, which is simply communicating. That's why like our First Amendment is super important. You can the whole manufacturing consent. If you say this is what's going on, this is why you should be bothered. People have all of the power. There was an officer that got arrested, not arrested. He lost his job recently because he stated a simple fact. He said people could overthrow the government in the night. He said it would be no problem whatsoever. So the media outlet it's about power, and it's about money is another way to affect change. It's power in its own way. So that's why that's important, and I think that he gets something out of it. It almost made it sound like he didn't want. There was no purpose for that outlet. He gets something out of it. He gets power out of it because he has an audience and he can communicate narratives. Apologies for taking so long.
DJ, always love hearing from you. Join the conversation, 202-521-1320. Teddy was addressing you. Go ahead and respond.
Well, DJ's totally right. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. What I meant to say by that is not that Dr. Pasoon-Xiang doesn't get something out of owning the LA Times. He does. For example, he controls the coverage of his own pharmaceutical company in Southern California because he owns the 2 largest media outlets in Southern California. So that's obviously extremely valuable. You're not going to have an investigative reporter go after Nantech because the LA Times and the San Diego Media Tribune's reporters would like to stay employed. But what I meant to say by that is that it's not that a lack of money is preventing a guy like that from paying his employees properly. Furloughs are occurring not because they have to. They could continue to pay these reporters, choosing not to, and it's a cold-blooded decision that really doesn't even have much to do with finances.
No, I think you're totally right. I mean, you look at the charter school movement in the United States. I mean, that's led by billionaires, led by the Walton family. Those people have plenty of money, but they want to sway ideology and they want to get power through thought. The charter school movement is not about making money for the vast majority of people. Obviously, there's some real estate interests that get mixed into it. But as you said, Ted, there's obviously a lot more to be had beyond money for folks. Once you have billions of dollars, it becomes about power and ideology. Ted Rall, we are out of time with the award-winning cartoonist and columnist. Ted, where can people find more of your work?
Best place would probably be my website, rall.com, RALL.com.
Very good. Ted Rall, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you again for joining us. After this break, we look at our Trends with Benefits, our weekly segment looking at the latest trends in the news. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in DC. We're back after this.
Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You hear that change in sound? Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with Bob Schlehuber. That change in sound, and it is indeed Thursday. That means trends with benefits. We have a really interesting trends with benefits today. Typically, we deal with the problems and the vagaries of our society, but today we're going to deal with solutions. One of the key trends that I think people are trying to accommodate is basically the pandemic and the social distancing policies that were put into place in order to ensure that people don't die en masse. Now, despite the economic repercussions of this, the reality of it is human health, I would imagine, should matter more. When my wife and I got the opportunity to travel, one of the things, I started working remotely, she was working remotely. We got the opportunity to travel for several months, but when we finally got back home and got back to the house, this adventurousness basically gave way to being stuck in the house, isolated with only us to keep ourselves company, because again, at this point, we were working from home. When I started back going into the office, coming here to DC, I started to realize the disparity in regards to the fitness level that took place for us being stuck in the house and isolated, as opposed to having to go to office and the routine level of going home and back and the things that were required and necessary just to function going into an office. Whether the population realizes it or come in contact with that yet, especially the people who are working from home, it is possible that they are better people than I am, in which case they continue their exercise and everything else, but it's also possible that a lot of them just haven't noticed. So for this segment, we're going to discuss ways of mitigating that and getting around that particular issue of a degradation in fitness level from being stuck at home in the isolation procedures. We're joined by Gail Whitty, a 500-hour registered yoga teacher on her way to becoming a yoga therapist and certified personal trainer who just launched the website and video workout series, Fit for Delightful Aging. Now, I told my mom to make sure she watches this segment. So, Gail, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you came on to the show. I mean, all of us, for the most part, have been dealing with cabin fever. And I would imagine this is doubly so for the elderly population because we're not all experiencing this equally. And a population that oftentimes is either stuck in a house or isolated, that isolation has become doubly so as they're concerned about their own health and well-being. The thing I loved about this particular segment was that you basically dealt with issues of, as you call it, quote unquote, delightful aging. Aging doesn't necessarily have to be a miserable process, and that issues of fitness can take place to help people age, quote unquote, gracefully. So what kind of options do seniors and people with limited mobility have when it comes to issues of fitness? And is there much out there that caters to them in order to ensure that that fitness is taken care of?
Well, that's a great question, and I haven't found much available. I launched the website because I teach in a community center where most of my people are in their golden years, and I also teach at a nursing home, and I launched the website in an attempt to try to get my classes to them. It's not going that great for the nursing home because so many of them are not on Facebook, and so we're still working on that. But in terms of options, even walking around the house, if you have a set of stairs, to try to use your stairs as often as possible, even just for the sake of going up and down. What else? And now that the weather is getting nicer, if you're able to get outside and walk around your neighborhood, I've noticed a lot of my neighbors are just pumping their arms and legs and working just to get a nice gentle sweat going. And you don't have to be beat red at the end of a workout for it to be effective. And so a nice walk, again, using your stairs, moving around your house can be beneficial. So just checking in on yourself and making sure that you're not even been on the couch for hours at a time without noticing.
You know, it's funny. In the course of this lockdown, I've binge watched every season of Vampire Diaries from beginning to end. My wife is sick of it. In addition to the originals. Yes, there are probably better ways that I could be using my time, especially in the area of fitness. You know, I'm curious, what's the difference in regards to dealing with fitness issues for somebody who's elderly or somebody who's older or getting older, as opposed to just the basic regular population?
Well, you have general health issues if they're dealing with blood pressure issues. You got to make sure that you're not getting up or going down too fast. Being careful that you're doing weight-bearing activities. And I meant to add in the last question, you could curl some cans of beans, look in your pantry for some alternative ways, because a couple of pounds can make a difference. And especially for people who are very elderly, a couple of pounds is really effective. In the general population, you don't really have to worry about tripping and falling and breaking a bone, things like that. Whereas as you get older, if they're experiencing symptoms of osteoporosis or they have brittle bones, that's a big issue. You don't want to have to go to the hospital right now for sure. So you just have to be careful with that. And then there's also, so in my aerobics classes, I do very little turning. So there's balance issues. Just want to be aware of maintaining balance and making sure the space that you're in is clear of anything that would hurt you if you did fall down. Things like that.
Yeah, Gail, I'm also just kind of curious, going back to your previous point there about the difficulties of necessarily connecting with a lot of seniors who maybe aren't on Facebook, and we have plenty of seniors who aren't on the weekly and daily Zoom calls like many of us, that it is a barrier to be able to connect with those folks right now. And it seems like a challenge for you and your efforts. And I'm glad you're doing them, because I've seen seniors around where I live that aren't getting those type of workout programs that are saying we absolutely want this. So there is the need there. But talk a little bit more about the hurdles and challenges to getting your work there to seniors that need it the most.
Well, from what I understand, because the woman that I connect with at this particular nursing home that I work at, she's overwhelmed. So there hasn't been a lot of communication. And I guess what they're working with is TV. It doesn't connect to the internet. And streaming my classes is somewhat impossible. And I have emailed the link to my website, but still, with this population, they're very old, and they don't all have computers, and 99% of them are not on Facebook. So it really feels very like they're very isolated. I imagine the only people who are going in and out of that building are the people who work there, and from what I understand, that's pretty pared down as well. So maybe I should go stand in front of a window and something. Because another part of the aspect of the group exercise that I teach is the actual socialization. I used to teach at a senior recreation center in Maryland, and these ladies would come in, full makeup, their hair done, into their aerobics class, and they do the moves much more mildly than it's myself or the other teacher. But it was to be with their friends, and that was the healthiest aspect of the whole class, I think.
I agree.
So
I totally agree. When my mom,
I was just gonna say, Jamar. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jamar.
No. Go ahead, Bob. Finish it.
I was just gonna say, for me, that question kind of leans into the point that our society isn't geared again around meeting the needs of people, because if it was, we would have grocery stores that are connected to senior living facilities. We would have more aerobics that we're already thinking about some of the general needs and isolation that a lot of seniors have. So obviously we know senior isolation is a huge issue. So if our government and our society was geared around addressing that in this situation right now, all of those people would already have Facebook or already have Zoom. There's all these things that our society hasn't been doing, that in a situation like this now, as you're saying, Gail, everybody's overwhelmed. Everybody's in kind of a crisis mode. Right now is not the time that we are going to build out the infrastructure. Thank God there are people like you that are trying to do this right now. But ultimately, if we're going to address this, this is where long-term systemic change needs to take place, that in this type of moment tomorrow, we're not in this kind of crisis and we don't know what to do.
No, I agree with you, Bob. And, you know, when my mom was doing, it was some kind of weight loss thing. One of the things that they found the most beneficial to it, if she was trying to do it by herself, she would struggle. If she was doing it with a group, it would be much easier. It's like that human element of socialization makes things, not just from a standpoint of cognitive, dealing with things from a conscious standpoint, meaning making your life somewhat better, cutting down on stress, having people to engage with and interact with. But it's beneficial just in general, especially from the standpoint of weight and everything else, when you have a large number of people that are backing you in doing so. I think that sounds like what you're saying, Gail, that part of the process of bringing these people together is the socialization. The dietary aspects or the fitness aspects are beneficial, but the socialization between these individuals and their ability to get together and prevent isolation is one of the other health benefits to it from a cognitive standpoint.
Yes, and even when we're not in quarantine mode, as my son would say, the senior years can be very lonely, especially if there's a loss of a spouse or even, heaven forbid, a child. So being able to be motivated to move your body, it comes a lot from knowing that one of the benefits is that you're going to be with other people, and often those people are also experiencing what you're experiencing. So what I see in my classes is women and men who are in the same boat in their personal lives, and they're able to gather in these areas, and we move around, we have a great time, and I try to make my classes really fun, and it's not focused on like, you have to get ripped. It's that we have to have fun, we're moving our bodies, and we're sharing this experience. It's a little strange on my end when I do my live streams, and sometimes I do like chair aerobics for people who can't get up out of the chair. But anything I do in a chair, anyone could do standing. But what I miss is the feedback from my classes' faces. So I find myself streaming these classes, and I'm like, I hope people are getting what I'm saying, because when I'm physically with people, I can see like if they're picking up on what I'm saying or not. But and I think that's another aspect of senior fitness that's really helpful and important, is that it keeps cognition going. Like your brain is working. You got to follow the steps or follow the instructions and embody it as well, and produce the movement yourself. Yeah.
I'm curious. How do we age? I think I'm the oldest.
Yeah, no,
person.
Absolutely. Those are all really great points. I really appreciate you thinking about more than just the physical movement of it, but also the mental cognition. I am curious, though, if we think long term, how do we creatively bring those different folks together? I think of one theater here in Washington, D.C., just for example, that said, you know what, we're not going to go online. We're not going to do theater online. There's something very important about being in physical space with one another. So it'll be interesting to see, Gail, about how you think about how do you get group settings? Is it a Zoom or a Skype group chat to bring folks together? So far, you've done these videos. They're fantastic. I've already shared them with some folks. I'm looking forward to sharing them with more people. What are some of the other challenges or issues you want to tackle as you started this process? Where do you go next?
That's a great question, because when I started this project, it was so I could try to get my classes out to other seniors. And then it turned into creative space, because I am here with my 5 and 7-year-old. I'm back in kindergarten and first grade. And then, so this has also become creative space for me to put more movement classes together, but also write down what I'm thinking in a blog, things like that. But also to kind of move down the years for people. I'm 39. Anywhere, in my age group, older is as you were saying at the top of the segment, is that aging could be a positive process if we choose to look at it that way. I mean, of course, it'll be frustrating to not be able to lose pounds after I go through menopause, or it's going to be frustrating for any number of reasons when I hit these health issues or changes in my body. But I can still try to think of positive ways to help cope with all that stuff. So that's another, aspect of what I would like to do with this online space is create for people who are in their golden years, and then also create a creative and positive community space around growing older in general, because every year is a gift, and I want to be happy with the process so that when it comes time that I have to go, then I wouldn't have wasted time being bummed out about the whole process.
Speaking of that, how do you age gracefully? I think I'm the oldest one on this team from the standpoint of the engineers and anybody that's working here. So how do I engage in the aging process in somewhat of a graceful way? They say black don't crack, so I'm not necessarily worried about looks going, but definitely, as you mentioned, in all of the physical, the changes in the physicality as we get older, the difficulty in losing weight, the difficulty or the illness that just comes about from the aging process in and of itself. How do we do this in a graceful way?
Well, I think it's important to prioritize what you're going to feel frustrated about, upset about. So, for instance, if physical illness, let's say someone doesn't like the fact that they have to readers, kind of a small thing, and everybody has their own level of frustration, but maybe save time you spend focusing on negative items for things that are big. Like I was mentioning before, there will come a time, unfortunately, when we have lost, we will lose people in our lives. I mean, we're really experiencing that now. So you can be conscientious about how you spend your energy on negative versus positive things. You find that, and I keep saying especially now, but that's where we are, people who are in a small group in their home or maybe even alone, if the record in your mind is on repeat over something negative, can you step back and say, do I need to be spending this much time in my mind on this very negative thing? Maybe I could try to find a way to distract myself towards something more positive, so that when it comes time that there really is something that is difficult to process, you would have more energy, mental energy, to put into that, as opposed to letting it spill all over anything that kind of crosses your path that might feel frustrating. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. Yeah, I think that's absolutely wonderful. It's something that I need to constantly remind myself of. So no matter what age, a lot to learn over here at Political Misfits. Gail Whitty, thank you again for joining us. We are unfortunately out of time. Tell us a little bit more about how we can find your website and video workout series, Fit for Delightful Aging.
www.delightfulaging.com, and I am slowly building the classes, but I'm very encouraged, especially by this phone call and the positive feedback I've gotten. So you can go to that website and check out what I've put up.
Fantastic. We'll let you know what we think, and hopefully Jamarl Thomas's mother was listening, and she'll also go check it out and let us know what she thinks. Fit for Delightful Aging. Gail, thank you again for joining us. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We got one more break before we come back with a few more pieces of news at the end of the hour. You're listening to Political Misfits live in DC. We're back after this.
hour of the day. It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We have about 10 more minutes left here on Thursday, May 14th episode of Political Misfits. Don't turn that dial. We're off at 2, but after this, you have By Any Means Necessary with Sean Blackman and Jacqueline Luqman, followed by Loud and Clear and the Critical Hour. A lot of great content coming your way. Jamarl Thomas, I want to just read one piece of news here from our fantastic producer, Michelle Whitty. Whitty writes here about the FBI's warning against China in the age of coronavirus 19. It does not stop. Read here, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security yesterday issued a joint public service announcement warning the FBI was investigating the targeting and compromise of U.S. organizations conducting COVID-19 related research by PRC-affiliated cyber actors and non-traditional collectors. The FBI statement says, quote, these actors have been observed attempting to identify and illicitly obtain valuable intellectual property and public health data related to vaccines, treatments, and testing from networks and personnel affiliated with COVID-19 related research. The potential theft of this information jeopardizes the delivery of secure, effective, and efficient treatment options. Jamarl, it's kind of funny, not really sure if China is the one that often steals intellectual property around medicine, since I don't think China is well known for achieving medical breakthroughs and then making sure that no one in the public or so few individuals can profit enormously from them. I don't think it's China that makes practice of that, but what country is that? Where does a $1,000 pill for hepatitis C treatment come from? I think that's the United States of America. It's Gilead, a company hard at work at finding a COVID-19 treatment. Jamarl, again, in the midst of a pandemic where the United States has been the most impacted in the world, and now China is basically able to limit their outbreaks down to almost next to nothing, and they're offering mass testing to everyone in the province where the disease once spread. That's 11 million people over the next 10 days, and all that the FBI and our Homeland Security be concerned about is China stealing information to continue to better handle the pandemic than us.
And let's understand what we're talking about here. I mean, basically 5,000 people are dead at this point, 1.4 million people infected. And the FBI's argument is, well, China's going to try to steal this vaccine. Well, the United States wants the vaccine so they can sell it at a ridiculous price to the various actors, whether that's the government buying the vaccine or whether that's those companies directly selling it to the various people in the population. They're trying to make a profit. So whatever, this notion of China trying to steal it, that's assuming that that's even true. Let's be very clear that the entire point of this issue or the concern about this basically boils down to we can't make a ton of profit if some other country steals this vaccine and starts, distributing it to people who actually need it. Like, it's such a weird thing. It's not so much that I'm like rah theft. It's more so I'm skeptical on whether or not this is true. And even if it is true, that the entire point of this is our companies need to make massive amounts of cash with the vaccine in order to deal with something that has cost 85,000 lives, and China is going to inhibit our profits.
Yeah, and this whole conversation constantly about the lack of transparency and information in China, but here in the United States, you have states like Arizona who have stopped sharing data with their own modeling agencies, and in Nebraska, where the state is also going to stop sharing data about infections at meat packing plants. And I talked about here in Washington, D.C., they don't even include the COVID-19 numbers within their official number that are taking place in jails and homeless shelters. So again, how is that being transparent, America? It's like we figured out a way to transparently not be transparent, that everything seems out in the open and that we're the most transparent people, but right in front of you, we then hide the real data. So again, this hyper critique of China in a moment when this own country has 2.5 million prisoners facing the COVID-19 outbreak, and you have state after state reopening, not sharing data, and not coming anywhere close to the amount of testing. But again, we're not the problem.
But you know, also there's this disturbing aspect of making these people invisible. Meaning, it's as if the people who are in our jails aren't real human beings. Actually, they are. They're human beings we're putting in cages. Or the people who are in these homeless shelters aren't real people. I guarantee you they are. They feel pain. They have joy just like any of us. The notion that you're going to pretend as if these aren't real people when you're dealing with the numbers is somewhat problematic. I mean, that basically means that this number is much higher, known much higher. Like, logically, you know the number's higher because we don't have the test kits. China, for whatever reason, could test everybody in that country, in that city the size of New York, or larger than the city of New York, and we have a difficult time getting test kits. But I think it's really important to kind of draw a circle around, a bright circle around this notion of us making various people invisible, whether that's the homeless or whether that's people in our jails. Both of those things should not be allowed.
Well, let's end on a couple of pieces of goodish news here, Jamal. One, The Guardian reports that the suicide rate in Japan dropped by 20% in April, the biggest drop in 5 years. Japanese experts attributed the drop in suicides to the relief the coronavirus lockdown offers from school and office pressures and spending more time with family. And in another piece of silver lining news here, in New York City, they have now gone a month without seeing one of its residents die by being hit by a car, the longest streak since the city started recording this data in 1983. The transportation commissioner attributed the streak to the citywide stay-at-home order. An NYPD spokesperson also told CNN that between April 13th and May 10th, collisions resulting in injuries in the city decreased by 69% year on year. That's a drop of more than 2,000 injury-causing accidents. Obviously, none of this is close to what's happened with the death rate there in New York City, but a few pieces of good news. More time at home away from brutal work conditions and less people driving cars has somehow made the world a better place. Who would have thought?
Just think, there's some random guy out there that is not entirely aware, doesn't necessarily know, the future and everything else, but his life was basically saved by 85,000 people dying of the coronavirus because he didn't get hit by a car or a bus.
Yeah.
Also, we should point out the indictment of our world. Meaning, in a situation where all of these people are ill, you found less people commit suicide, not because those people died off, but because those people were able to pull themselves out of their pressing, burdensome responsibilities of either job or school. I'm fascinated by that. Like, if that's not an indictment that something is wrong with your society where people kill themselves less because they can engage, more so with their family, I don't know what is.
Yeah, just one last piece of news to follow up on that New York City news. The commissioner of transportation in New York said, though, despite the drop there in traffic accidents and pedestrian deaths, the commissioner noted that a lot more people are speeding on the empty roads, with speed cameras catching almost twice as many speeding violations as usual. Open roads, we got Fast and the Furious, but luckily no one has been hit. Jamal, with that, we are out of time, unfortunately, with our show today here on Political Misfits. A big thank you to our guests today, Ted Rall and Trudy Goldberg. As always, a big, big thank you to our radio engineers, Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, for heading into the office and keeping us live daily. You all are greatly appreciated. Big shout out to the entire Sputnik News team and our producer, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamarl Thomas and myself, Bob Schlehuber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always, I want to thank all of you for joining us for the show. We do have a super chat. Just logged in. Wisconsin person here. Eric Lunch, you should have called in. That would have been perfect. Wesley Walker, I hope Jamal has more shows today. Wesley Walker, you're going to get your wish. We will. Excuse me. I will be having additional shows today, so don't worry about that. I'll be back in a few. I'm going to help my wife with something. She's trying to get out the house and take the dogs for a drive, but I'll be back today, probably within an hour or so. So I will see you guys then. Constitutional Journal. Jamal, what are your thoughts on HR 6666? The language, which is not narrowly tailored, gives me the broad use of fears, the way the Patriot Act did. Thank you for your show. So is HR 6666, ironically named 6666, that bill where basically Sanders wasn't there, where they allowed spying in regards to your browser history? I could be wrong, but I need to check that out. But if that's what it is, oh God, yeah, that's horrible. The fact that Sanders wasn't available for that particular vote and they lost by 1 vote, that is horrible. That is horrible. If you, as a lefty, and calling yourself a socialist, can't drag your ass to Congress to place that vote, something is wrong. It is worse. Constitutional Journal. Constitutional Journal, I'm going to look that bill up right now. Well, while I'm in the passenger seat of the car. And I'll review it and do a show on it. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all for joining us. I'll see you guys in a few. Bye-bye.